Hi, this is Ryan McReynolds, one of the Republican candidates for state representative in the 94th District. And, well, as you can see, I'm filming outside this time. It is on my front porch or something. Well, anyways, it's the weekend. 3 more days until the primaries occur. Do I think I will actually win the primaries? Well, I think in the end we're going to all be in for a big surprise on who emerges the victor in the Republican primaries. That's all I can say on that part. But I am going to talk to you about some major deceptions that have gone on. For instance, the real history of our country is no longer being taught. Why? Deceptions. For example, a lot of people do not realize that most of our founding fathers were dedicated Christians. And the Word of God inspired them in their quest for freedom from tyranny at the hands of King George III and the British Parliament, as we the people weren't allowed to send voting representation to London to be able to vote against these taxes that were being imposed on us when we weren't even allowed to have voting representation to Parliament in London. I mean, sure, we had representatives to London, except they weren't voting reps. They were rather, people who would speak on our behalf, but they weren't voting representation. They were non-voting reps, But we didn't have voting representation. Who could vote against the things that we, the colonists, didn't want? And the 27 violations that the British committed against us were biblical violations. The Declaration of Independence was written and signed, and these were not poor men. A lot of them were actually rich. But, in spite of how rich these people were, they wanted freedom, not just for themselves, but for every citizen, even the middle class and the poor. They wanted freedom for every American living in the colonies. And they risked their lives by signing the Declaration of Independence. They risked their wealth. Some of them even lost their wealth because of their signing of the Declaration of Independence. Some of them got imprisoned for it. Some of them were cut off from their families. But they never, ever renounced the fact that they had signed one of the important documents in history. And the Declaration of Independence actually even mentions God, our Creator. So how can anyone say that our founding fathers wanted us to be freed from religion? Our First Amendment actually says freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. In fact, our First Amendment never called for separation of church and state. Rather, all it said is that Congress cannot establish or prohibit a church. So accordingly, the federal government is not supposed to be able to create a national church. However, it did not prohibit individual states from creating state churches, and some of them did for a time. Virginia made Episcopalian the official religion. Massachusetts made the Congregational Church the official religion. And a Baptist church in Massachusetts wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson when he was president, raising concern about it, And the first time separation of church and state is even mentioned, Thomas Jefferson wrote, not about facts, but rather opinion, and in his opinion, he spoke of favoring a wall of separation. But what did he mean by that? He didn't mean it the way people like the ACLU word it today. No. All Thomas Jefferson meant was that we were not going to be like what Europe was when the bishops and the cardinals were part of both church and state. Granted, it was one thing if somebody holding a title like reverend or deacon or bishop or cardinal was to actually run for political office, because then, you know, the political position would be a separate thing from their religious position. But titles like bishop and cardinal would not be both political and religious, they would be just religious. And also, you know, he didn't mean that religion would not play a role in the lives of government officials. All he meant was that the government was to stay out of the affairs of religion. And in fact, you know, there was a case when there was a teacher that got fired from a school run by my denomination, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and it went to the Michigan Supreme Court, I believe. But, surprise this, surprise that, not only did the Republican judges side with the school, the Democrat judges also sided with the school too, because even if the Democrat judges didn't actually believe what the church believed, they were like, well, you know what? This is the doctrine of the individual church that runs that school. And the teacher who got fired was in violation of the rules of the church. And so every judge, Republican and Democrat, all agreed that this teacher violated church rules and that the church was right in their filing, you know, their firing of the teacher, termination, whatever you call it. They were right to fire her, you know, from the job, because she violated church doctrine. Okay? And it serves, you know, as an example of when government decides, okay, we're not going to dictate what the churches do, we're going to obey what the churches do. Anyways, thank you for watching, and God bless.